Right. My second book, Adolescence on the Autism Spectrum, I speak a lot about how we have to inform our students and our children with autism and Asperger's about sexuality and about appropriate and inappropriate touching or boundaries, and also about relationships and the kinds of conversations you have in relationships, because they can get in trouble when they're out in the community, and as they get older, it becomes a real problem.
You're absolutely right, because in some families, they consider this topic to be taboo. You don't talk about certain parts of your body. You don't talk about sexuality. But if you don't help these children to understand themselves very intimately, then they cannot make informed choices, because they're going to act impulsively as opposed to acting by choice, because they don't understand these drives. They don't understand these feelings and why they want to act this way. They just act upon it. So they really need to be educated about what is making them tick in those situations and what is the best and safest way to act upon those things.
I think I need to also bring up, since we're talking about these issues, is that from traveling around the country, because I speak in a lot of different places, so a lot of people come up and ask me questions and tell me their stories, and I'm amazed at the number of teenage girls and boys who are sexually abused or get in situations because people they're not doing it like in terms of, say, specifically trying to be sexually active with someone, but say, here's a perfect example, a young teenager female with Asperger's will want to be friendly with the group of girls that she knows are the popular girls. And so they realize that there's something wrong with this girl, but nobody's ever, not wrong, but that she's different, but nobody's ever explained Asperger's, and nobody's ever explained to this girl what sexual acts are. And so they tell the girl to go and do something with some boys and then come back and tell them about it. And the girl does not realize that she's been asked to perform a sex act. She has no idea, no clue, because nobody's ever spoken to her about it. And the point is that many times we don't tell teens on the spectrum about sex, what constitutes a sex act, and also the responsibilities that go along with the sexual feelings that they're having. And because we feel that if they don't have the knowledge or they won't be interested. But the point is, if they're hearing about it all day long, they need to understand what it is that's being talked about. Don't you agree, Brian?
Oh, absolutely. It's naive of parents to think that if you don't talk about it, that the kids aren't going to hear about it somehow. I mean, you definitely want to have quality control over the information they're getting, and a parent has the best opportunity to help the child learn judgment, whereas their peers aren't going to be interested in teaching them that.
You're absolutely right. That's an important aspect. In fact, are you familiar with Zosia Zaks?
Well, I've heard of her. I've heard of her book. I haven't met her or talked to her, though.
Oh, that's right. I've just put you two in contact about another book project. I forgot about that. But she wrote this wonderful book. Oh, here it is. It's called Life and Love, Positive Strategies for Autistic Adults. And she talks about how what a good strategy is for an older teen or an adult to have a safe person that they can ask questions of to know, like, is this the correct thing to do in a social situation? Like, for example, or even in high school, if someone could have an adult or another peer that they trust, that they could ask questions like, you know, so-and-so's asked if I'll walk home from school with him. Well, there's all these things that you have to think about. Well, are you walking bright daylight? Is it a busy street? Are you, in a safe neighborhood? Do you know this person really well? All these kinds of questions where someone with Asperger's may not think about asking. And so if you have a safe person, you can kind of use their judgment in helping you to assess the situation and over time learn how to make your own decisions. Do you find those kind of suggestions helpful?
Oh, yeah, and I have a term for those people. I call them my advisors. And depending on what stage you are in your life determines what kind of advisors you need. Because when you are a smaller child, you need advisors, well, maybe even as an adult, advisors in issues of safety and social conduct. In my adult life, I have advisors in the areas of finance, when purchasing a car, when making any kind of purchase that has a complex transaction, because fast-talking salesmen, they can get the best of us, but especially somebody on the spectrum is very trusting and really doesn't understand things. So I have advisors around me who is not only is it their job to inform me, but also to protect me. And they know who they are, and they've agreed to that role, and I can go for them. I can go to them in these specific situations. So one of the secrets to my success as an adult is I have a very tight inner circle of people that are there to advise and protect me.
Very good. That's great to know. Okay, here's a question from Debbie in Baltimore. Where organization is a big problem, is it better to have the child manage with help his binder or folders or desk, or is it okay to do some of the housekeeping for him? It can be so overwhelming for Asperger students to try to keep their things in order day after day.
Well, first of all, you have to understand what is at the root of the disorganization. Because some people look at a messy room and say, oh, your room is always so messy and you need to pick it up. Well, if you have a child that has sensory integration issues, then you are talking about a child that is internally disorganized. So how on earth can you organize your outside world when you are not organized inside? You're not interacting with the world in an organized way. So something as simple as putting your notebook together could seem like a major challenge because neurotypicals who are walking around very organized, they can organize their bookshelves, they can organize their desk, they can organize every part of their life because internally they are coming from a place of organization. When you are on a spectrum, you're coming from a place of disorganization, your life will mirror that. So if a child has a real difficulty organizing their paperwork and everything, then you got to say, well, we got to consider the source here. Maybe this child is not organized enough to do this. So I'd say the best solution for a child who just really can't seem to organize, at least make them a part of the organization. Do it with them instead of doing it completely for them. Because doing it for them makes them dependent. Makes them feel like they can't. If you do it with them, they learn collaboration. They learn how to utilize other people as resources. Those are opportunities to connect with other people and learn socialization. So whenever possible, do it with them collaboratively.
Plus, I find it's always easier when you're doing something that's hard for you or that you dislike with other people. I'm saying this because if you could see the office that I'm sitting in right now, I've got piles of papers and books everywhere, and part of it is a time issue. But the other part of it is I'm the type of person, if I don't see everything, I'm afraid to put things away because I'm afraid if I don't see it, I won't do it anymore. So, or I'll forget that I have this assignment to do or a deadline. But the problem is it gets overwhelming after a while, so then it's too overwhelming for me to do on my own or I get depressed thinking about doing it. So that's when I have someone come in and help me. And it's so much more fun when you're two people doing it. Besides going faster, it's just more uplifting.
Yeah, and also if you enjoy that social contact, it can really lighten the situation up.
Right. Okay. We have so many more questions here. Here we go from Lamond in Atlanta, Georgia. My son has an odd, gawky gait. He walks on his tiptoes. He doesn't walk heel to toe. He sounds like he is smacking his feet on the floor when he walks. What can I do to help him? Any recommendations?
Yeah, get him to an occupational therapist. Because it sounds like, and this used to be the case for me, where I would feel like when I was, well, not so much walking, but whenever I was running or lightly jogging, I literally felt like my feet were slamming into the ground. And that has a lot to do with, I think, is proprioception. Proprioception is the nerves in your joints, in your muscles that tell your brain where your body is in space. And if his proprioceptive nerves aren't reading his body position well, then he doesn't sense where his body is. He probably is stomping the ground hard because his body isn't registering how he's contacting the earth. So he needs some serious regulation work. So he's got to get to an occupational therapist to help work on that stuff.
Good advice. My son has this is from Deborah Pretzer in Fresno, California. My son has ADHD, PDD, Asperger's. He has difficulty in school even with an aide full-time, and I have tapped into a lot of services. He has difficulty with anger and impulsivity. He tries to be funny to ward off people or to get friends. Neither are working. I am tired and frustrated and want to relate to him. His behavior makes the situation, if you do this, then that, and he wants words constantly. What am I missing?
Well, that's a very complex situation. Well, first of all, he's got a lot of redundant labels. So there needs to be a lot more clarification on just what's going on with him, because you don't call somebody PDD and Asperger's. It's one or the other. And also the ADD, as I mentioned earlier, let's clarify what's the source of the distraction. Is it his brain doesn't focus, or he doesn't focus in certain settings? And him trying to, and I was a bit of a class clown myself, so I can relate to this, is you're trying to get a positive response from your peers. And, laughter is a positive response. So you do whatever you can to try and get the laughter. So what he's looking for is he's looking for acceptance. And it's a reasonable request. He just needs to learn more effective strategies to get it. So that's what he's trying to accomplish with the jokes. What were the other parts of that question?
He has difficulty with anger and impulsivity. I'm tired and frustrated, and I want to relate to him.
Okay, the anger and impulsivity are coming from being reactive. An impulse is something that you just react to something without making a choice. You're not deciding to do it. You just kind of do it. There's a big self-awareness issue there. He's not choosing how to interact with his environment because he doesn't know enough about what he wants to plan. So when they say impulsivity, I'm wondering if it's possible to get clarification. Is he blurting things out? Is he touching? What is he doing impulsively? Because that's important to understand, too. What is he trying to accomplish? If he's impulsive verbally, he's blurting out answers, he's saying inappropriate things, then that's just an issue of him trying to verbally, socially engage, but not knowing how to do it, and needing some clarification on what are the best strategies, depending on what he wants to accomplish. If it's physical impulsivity, he's got certain boundary issues, he doesn't know how to keep his hands off people. Some of that might be sensory, because there are some kids that are just touchy-feely because that's how they help organize themselves in a stressful environment. Or they want to get somebody's attention and they don't know to say, excuse me, so they just reach out and touch. So it's important to understand what he's trying to accomplish, because everything he's doing, as frustrating as it is, serves a purpose for him until he learns a more effective way to do it.
Okay. Now here's Terry Podzinski from Willowbrook, Illinois, and she has a few questions. The first one is ADHD on the spectrum?
It probably will be soon. I mean, I've heard some chatter in the community that they're starting to realize enough overlap in ADHD and PDD-NOS that in the next edition of the DSM-4, it could very well be brought into the spectrum. But that's ultimately the decision of the writers of the DSM.
All right, but how do you feel about that?
I think they're very close cousins. I think I would be very comfortable if they put ADD and ADHD on the spectrum.
And she has a question. How is it you were diagnosed? I feel that I may be on the spectrum now that my son is diagnosed PDD, NOS, autistic. I'm ADHD. As I deal with my son, I really want to know, how does an adult get screened? Well,
typically, I went through the similar process to my son. I went and got an OT eval. I went to a psychologist. And with adults, a lot of it is you really just need to retrace your life, because adults that have grown up and have learned to compensate, typically if you go to a diagnostician, they'll see how well you're doing and say, oh, you're not on the spectrum because, you're able to do things so well, because they don't appreciate all the effort you're putting into doing those things. So they mistake your competence or your compensation for being functional. So when people see how I can accomplish things, they don't realize that it's done with an incredible amount of concentration. So when I tell them my entire life, the meltdowns, the sensory stuff, and they look at the whole picture, then they can say, yeah, you've been on the spectrum your whole life and somebody missed it. So you really need to go in with a whole lot of information. And, of course, you don't want to go to just any psychiatrist because they're not all skilled alike on the spectrum. You want to find somebody who spends a lot of time working with that population. And I know that the people who are on this call are from all over the states, so they don't have the privilege of being in my area because I have a very specified and very exclusive list of people that I refer to. But it shouldn't be too difficult. Again, go through the grapevine, do the research, ask around. Do you know anybody who specializes in the autism and the spectrum? Ask your own physician if they know anybody who specializes in that. Because, believe it or not, doctors do talk to each other. And they may know a psychiatrist who does a lot of work, and they could send you in that direction, or a psychologist. But if you are told that you're ADD and your child's on the spectrum, there's a possibility that you were called ADD and you're actually on the spectrum, but the person who gave you that label didn't know any better, or because you've masked a lot of other things. Or I've also seen in families where any kind of neurosensitivity can lend itself to creating a spectrum child. You'll see families with histories of depression and bipolar and anxiety, and then all of a sudden an autistic child shows up. And they say, oh, but there's no autism in the family. I said, yeah, but it's rampant with neurodiversity. There's neurosensitivities all over the family. So it's just a matter of time before an autism one showed up, because it just kind of makes sense.
Here's someone also who's asking, Norma Drew from Holland, Michigan. I would like to know if you're taking any new clients or patients.
Oh, yeah, all the time.
Okay. Holly from Clinton. Hi, Brian. Will you please cover the red tape that we have to go to for the high-functioning ASPE? My son is 6, super high IQ, and the schools aren't at all concerned about the social aspect of school, and this is the area that my son suffers from most. Any suggestions how to handle the school? He has charmed the teachers and staff, so nobody believes that he has issues. He has 4 medical diagnoses, but not an educational diagnosis. Thank you for your help.
Well, the one thing I'm doing on my end of things over here is I'm addressing that with, again, my push for a character curriculum where you're teaching a person how to be a human being, not just be a functioning student. So you're modeling it to the neurotypical as well as the spectrum kids. And it makes sense that he's going to endear himself to the teachers because kids on the spectrum are very savvy with the information people, the people who are teaching them, the people who have information. It's much more easier to engage those people because it's just information exchange. But when you have to deal with people your own age where it's more chit-chat and it's much more, socially frivolous, he's going to have a harder time there. And the teachers aren't going to see that because they're not watching him interact. So the biggest thing is to advocate for those 3 components I mentioned earlier: future education, independent living, and further employment, future employment. Because they need to understand that it's their responsibility to help him achieve those things, and it should be pretty easy to demonstrate where he has challenges in those areas. So just advocate as hard as you can for them to meet all of his needs that are going to help him succeed later in life. So advocacy is really the first place to start.
Great advice. Here's Jerry LaValle from Orlando. I'm so excited about this seminar. Charles, psychiatrist, has listed him as being on the autism spectrum. He has been tested for autism and Asperger's by the school, but they said he didn't meet the criteria because he makes eye contact and he has a low IQ. However, when his teacher and I filled out the forms, he was within the criteria. He is learning to read, he's 10, and does quite well in math. He is also the first child in his teacher's class who has gotten an outstanding in art. In fact, he tantrums when his art is taken from him. That is all he wants to do. As of right now, his school is listing him as having a learning disability. They left it open because of pressure from me, but they want us to sign a release of his psychiatric records to be put in his IEP. I don't want to, but they say he will not get the help he needs when he is in middle and high school if we don't. What do you think we should do?
Well, first, who is the person that said he's not on the spectrum because he makes eye contact?
The school district.
Okay, well, they're a bunch of dodo birds, okay? Because, again, there are so many criteria involved. Eye contact is just one. And I have seen kids, myself included, if you catch me in a situation where my sensory needs are met, there's dim lighting, I'm very calm, my eye contact is a lot better than if you put me in the middle of a party because I get disorganized. So if somebody is assessing him one-on-one in a very sensory-friendly environment and he makes eye contact, then my response is, duh, you've just met his needs. But if you want to assess a child to be on the spectrum, put them on the playground, put them in the cafeteria, watch them in the environment that doesn't work for a spectrum child, and you will see everything come out. So sometimes it has everything to do with the assessor as well as the context in which the assessment is taking place. In terms of all of these records they want, get a very clear explanation as to why these records are necessary to help them make their decision. What can possibly be in those records that they can't determine through their own evaluation process?
Right. I mean, already this person states that the psychiatrist has listed him as being on the autism spectrum. So isn't that
right?
Sort of an indication right there? I mean, that one document should be enough for their records, don't you think?
Yeah, that's why I'm surprised. You know, how much proof do they require? Why are they being so stingy? You know, what does it they think they have to have in order to trust this outside professional's assessment?
I mean, why do they care whether on the IEP he's a learning disability or he has Asperger's? I mean, if the Asperger's is the area that's going to help him get the supports he needs to, get where he needs to be as an adult, then why don't they want to accept and put that on the IEP?
Well, if it's a lazy school district, an Asperger's label requires them to do a lot more work. If it's just learning disabled, that they can define for themselves what that means. And they can say, well, learning disabled, well, he has trouble reading, so we'll just give him the reading support. We'll ignore everything else. He doesn't need social work time. He doesn't need speech. He doesn't need OT. We'll just focus on the reading thing. So if they control the label, they control the services. Okay. So it's really important to make sure that whatever is on the IEP most accurately reflects the child's needs.
Okay, here, I don't know who this is from, but as a man with Asperger's syndrome, what have you found to be the hardest obstacle in your life? Marriage and family, holding a job, going to college, making friends? Which one of these kinds of areas?
Well, ironically, I began my day yesterday in divorce court. My wife of almost 12 years, a few months ago decided she did not want to be a wife or a mother anymore because she's got an Aspie husband and 3 Aspie children, and just decided she'd be happy with a single life. So I'd say one of the things that really derailed me there is when she was telling me everything was happy and everything was fine, I just took her at face value because I have a difficult time even now reading how I'm doing with others. You know, if they're happy with me, if they're upset with me, I need them to give me specific feedback to let me know how I'm doing. And in the case with her, I'd ask her how I was doing, and she'd lie to me. So she wouldn't have that discussion. So I'd say the biggest frustration in all areas of life is when I proceed from a place of honesty and want to have honest, open discussions with people, and they don't want to reciprocate, it's hard for meaningful communication to take place. Because in the neurotypical world, it's all about protecting people's feelings. Oh, well, you know, he asked me this honest question, but he's not really asking for honesty. Well, yes, I am. So I'd say the difference in communication styles is probably one of the hardest things to overcome, when people don't realize that I'm genuine in my efforts and what I'm trying to accomplish.
Interesting. That's very good. It's really wonderful to have you here on the show to speak what it's like from someone who actually has Asperger's or who's certified as having Asperger's. Here's one from Annette in San Diego. Well, that's where I'm speaking from right now, San Diego. Hello, I would like to know how I can get my son to take everyone else's feelings into consideration besides his own. For example, if he wants to do something and I do not want to, he gets upset. Like I'm supposed to do whatever he wants to do. I'm supposed to want to do whatever he wants to do.
Well, in that instance, it has less to do with other people's feelings than it has to do with a sense of entitlement, that he feels because he wants it, he's owed it. And the other part of that is he needs to understand and be able to explain, if he does want to have his way all the time, well, why? Why is it important for him to have it his way all the time? And if he doesn't have it his way, then what? Because there are some kids on the spectrum, many that I've worked with, who don't understand that you can not get your way and still be all right. Because they think if I don't get my way, I won't feel safe, I won't feel comfortable, and I'll be frustrated and I'll be uncomfortable. And these kids need to learn to understand I can be uncomfortable and still be okay. But if it was much more of a feeling issue, sometimes these kids first need to understand that other people actually do have feelings and that other perspectives actually exist. Because the more egocentric a child is, the less likely they are to think that people's thoughts are actually different from their own. That's called perspective taking. Some of the theorists call it theory of mind. So when you have a child saying, well, I want you to do this with me. What do you mean you don't want to do it with me? It makes sense in my head. I think it's the most exciting thing in the world. What do you mean your thoughts are different from mine? So it's a matter of helping him understand the fact that everybody doesn't think the way he does. And if he's assuming that people do, that's what he's getting upset about. Because you basically proved him wrong by saying you don't want to do it. Because his assumption is everybody thinks like me and that's how it's supposed to be.